Hello, my name is Nwuneli. I work for Helvetas. I'm the program coordinator and senior advisor in sustainable and inclusive economics. So thank you for joining us in this event on Enterprising Africa. We'll be asking and discussing critical questions and issues. For example, we'll be discussing on how the economic and social potentials of Africa can be unleashed. How can we influence and stimulate sustainable and scalable impact? Who is better positioned to do that? So these are the most important questions that we'll be discussing in this event. So why don't you join me and I can take you through in this event.
Dear friends of Helvetas, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here to the first Helvetas Symposium. My name is Melchior Lengsfeld. I'm the Executive Director of Helvetas. 20 years from now, the number of sub-Saharans reaching working age will exceed that of the rest of the world combined. In 25 years, half of the world's youth will be African. We all know that this potential demographic dividend easily can turn in a demographic curse. If the African economies cannot generate millions of jobs, millions of young people will be excluded from an economically productive life. And social tensions will rise. If there are no massive answers for labor market integration of the African youth, it's very likely that we'll see more poverty, more inequality, more conflicts, and more migration. So that's clearly the picture that statistics tell us, but that's also the picture we get from the media. But is that the whole story? We would say there is a lot of other stories to tell, and tonight we want to focus a little bit on this more entrepreneurial dynamics.
I think Africa is naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. We are blessed and we have a competitive and comparative advantage in most value chains. We have biggest percentage of our population engaged in agriculture, lots of rain-fed agriculture. Sadly, we import a lot of food, $30 to $50 billion worth of food, but this sector is projected to reach $1 trillion. If Africans spend just $1 on food, that's a humongous market. We know that the average African spends more than $1 on food every single day. However, this is what the world sees. I took this picture when I went to the EAT Forum about 3 years ago. So the EAT Forum is this conference for those in agriculture in Stockholm. And as I walked to my train after giving my speech, I saw this picture at the train station. And I was really upset, because this is what the world sees when they see Africa. They see a hungry child. And my life's purpose is really to address this stereotype and to change it, and we're already doing that. We know that we have malnutrition challenges, but it's not as widespread as we think, but it's a crisis. So we know we have those challenges. We know that hunger kills more than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined, according to the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. And I love this quote by Akinwumi Adesina, which says, economic progress is undermined by hunger, malnutrition, and stunting, which costs at least $25 billion annually in sub-Saharan Africa and leaves a lasting legacy of loss, pain, and rude potential. Stunted children today lead to stunted economies tomorrow. So it's a real problem, and we're taking it on. But how has this become our reality? And this question was asked a number of times today. I think that, honestly, many of our countries were set up for the colonialists to export commodities and import products. So when you look at most of the infrastructural layouts in many of our countries, there are no linkages between the farmers and the markets. There are linkages between the farmers and the ports, and that's the reality. So literally, we're rebuilding that infrastructure today. There's been a low level of mechanization, low level of fertilizer use, and limited irrigation. And then most of our value chains are uncompetitive. And this is also because we've really focused on cash crops to the detriment of our food crops. And that's really the reality in many countries. If you go to a country like Côte d'Ivoire, that's a net exporter of cocoa, right? Exports between Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, 60% of the world's cocoa. Most of the farmers there are unproductive when it comes to maize or cassava, what their populations consume, because they're focused on the export market. A young African speaking to an African president said, "This generation is no longer asking God to grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change." Some of you might know this prayer. It's an English prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. He said, no, we are asking the Almighty to grant us the courage and the wisdom to change the things we cannot accept. So in my lifetime, I have decided that that face of an African child, being a swollen, sunken-eyed child who is malnourished, is not what I'm going to accept as my reality. And we are going to change that because we believe we can feed ourselves and even export. So there are some practical steps for you to consider. The first is that we have to change our mindset. And with the youth today, it was very clear that we all have to learn a little more about each other. There's so much ignorance in the room, in every room, about Africa, about Europe, and together we have to change our mindsets. Second is we have to buy proudly African food. Everywhere I go in Europe now, I ask people, what's your favorite African dish? If I asked you, what's your favorite Nigerian dish? Apart from the Africans in the room, most people wouldn't know. I was speaking at The Hague earlier this year at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, and I asked the same question. Most people were blank. And I went on the internet, and I found 4 African restaurants in The Hague. 3 were Ethiopian. And I Googled Thai restaurants in The Hague, and there were over 100. And Thailand is one country. We have amazing food in Africa, but most people don't know. They don't know that the rooibos that they drink, I've been seeing rooibos in the different hotels in Europe, is from South Africa. They don't know that the cocoa in their chocolate is from Ghana or from Côte d'Ivoire. They actually have never heard of fonio. The journalist I interviewed today had never heard of fonio. How many of you have heard of fonio? But you've heard of quinoa. How come? Quinoa is farther away in South America. Fonio is in your backyard, and Africans have been eating it, and it's a superfood, and we've been eating it for centuries. So there is an ignorance, but you guys have to start doing what? Buying proudly African food. Third, we have to advocate for a level playing field for African farmers and processors. There is a double standard. I can tell you because I work in the dairy sector. If we took the dairy sector as an example and considered farmers in the Netherlands or in Denmark or in New Zealand and how they're supported and compared them to my farmers, there's no way that we can compete unless we create that level playing field. We have to advocate against dumping and food fraud in Africa. Africa is considered the sink of the world. Because I work in food, it makes me so sad when I see what is being exported to Africa. Even just in spices alone, most of what they call spices are just corn flour, dyed red, oftentimes with carcinogenic Sudan red that makes it look like chili pepper, and it kills people. And it makes me so angry. So that's just one example, but there's dumping in so many other products that is unacceptable. And then finally, we have to tell positive stories. There are 1,000,001 entrepreneurs like myself on the African continent who are growing, and they need to be supported. But if we keep telling the stories of the extreme poverty, then they get ignored, and nobody actually knows they exist. It's time that we start telling those positive stories. We must leave a legacy for our children and grandchildren. I'm in legacy mode because we have to say, how will we be remembered? What impact will we have made? And it's really important that we do this, leave a legacy.
So what makes people to move to the informal economy? Sometimes it's also the tax system that we have. And there is an IMF study that looks at doing business and paying taxes, the rankings, and so on. And then that study also looks at 3 indicators that informs this. The first one is the payments, the second one is the time, and the third one is the the total tax rate borne by the firms. So the number of payments indicates like the frequency with which a company has to file and pay different types of taxes and contributions. The time indicator captures the number of hours. And in Africa, sometimes on the continent, we don't have the system that makes it easy for people to do these things. The second one I'll mention is the labor rigidity. I believe here you don't have much problem with unions. I was chatting to some colleagues from Helvetas. They said to me, no, unions they're okay, they're nice here. We face a big challenge also with unions. You know, South Africa's finance minister just this past weekend made mention of the challenges the country is facing because of the minimum wage. So the challenge the country is facing also on balancing the effect of the unions also. Because the unions in our side of the world, they're more like political parties because they're in partnership with some political parties. And that makes it difficult when the ruling party is in bed with the unions, and so on and so on. But then on labor rigidity, I also want to talk of the tight labor regulations that exist. Because when you have that, it increases unemployment. And these regulations decreases the freedom of both the employer and the employee to make decisions. You know? I was chatting to someone also yesterday who said to me, I won't mention his name, he said, it's difficult for me to get in 50 more people in my team because we don't have that issue of unions. Because maybe if they have it, then they wouldn't, because I'll be thinking, what if tomorrow I'm forced to pay them more and I can't let them go, and so on? What are the implications of that? The third one I'll mention is the institutional quality. And a weak judiciary system, bureaucracy, lack of transparency, these all contributes to the size of the informal economy. But how do we grow the informal sector and ensure job creation and entrepreneurship? The first one is what I call security of tenure. A lot of the guys you see in the informal space, they have that little kiosk on the street. But then, the goods that they order will only be fitted, can only fit in that kiosk. They know that maybe they're even disobeying the bylaws of the city, and they know that being where they are is not sustainable, it's not long-term, so they can be chased out of that place. So if they don't have security of tenure, they can't really invest in their business. They can't grow further. So insecurity is a challenge that they face. The second one is access to capital. Because they don't have records, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have financial statements, this also affects them. And the key thing is, how are the startups that I've shown you previously developing technology, developing tools that will help them to be able to have records, to be able to access capital. So the last page that I'll look at now is what policymakers can do to tackle informality. Sometimes being informal is actually good, but sometimes it doesn't help you to grow. It doesn't give you that lifeline to be able to scale, to be able to contribute more to job creation and your community. So the first thing I think policymakers should do is looking at the regulatory framework for business. So the entry regulation, how easy is it for startups, for these informal businesses to come into the formal economy? The second point is reforming the labor market institutions. If it's too restrictive, then it reduces also the number of people that are in the formal market. They are more aligned to go to the informal market. And then the last one is reducing the tax burden.
So far, what some governments did was legislation, that is enforcing companies, to meet some of these criteria, or to approach, workers and employers and then to kind of increase the awareness that they have the rights and we need to respect the rights. But what has been missing from my perspective is the business case. The business case for private companies really to invest and not to lose their workers, to treat their workers correctly. Otherwise, it will be an additional investment for them. It will be a loss. Yeah? So I see very few examples in Africa where we can really document these good examples, maybe from some of the employers, to make the business case. So the legal aspect, the awareness about rights, and the business case might really contribute to addressing, some of the deficits of employment.
In Nigeria alone, it's cheaper to bring in potatoes from the UK than to transport potatoes from Jos to Lagos. And I explained why. The feeder roads don't exist because historically they were not invested in. So that is expensive. And so infrastructure is expensive to build. And we need to figure out ways to circumvent it. But we still need the roads. We can circumvent electricity because of solar and other things. We have so many other uses. But the roads, I don't know how we can do it without government support. It's just too expensive. So much has to be said around African governments holding each other accountable, calling out bad behavior. We need to sort that ourselves. Then in-country building strong institutions, bringing strong systems and structures. And I tell the African governments this face-to-face. I do. So we need to hold each other accountable. And then private sector needs to hold governments accountable as well, and civil society. And we need stronger civil society in many of our countries. Some of our civil societies structures have been so weakened. And Nigeria is one example. Right now, we're looking at things happening in our country and wondering, where is civil society with some of the things going on? Today is our independence, and today Nigeria is 59 years old. And I've been preventing myself from tweeting about what a 59-year-old man or woman should be doing. By 59, you have no excuses, right? You have to step up and become... You're talking about your grandchildren when you start getting to 59. So we're at that stage where we need maturity and we need strong institutions and we need civil society to step up. And so as a Nigerian, I'm very aware of our shortcomings and our potential as a country. And so we need to do more.
So I think my friends right there are somehow not trying to give a clear picture about leadership. I know my sister said we shouldn't blame the leaders, we shouldn't put everything towards the leaders. But I'm telling you, I think we're talking about two different worlds. I think where I come from in Africa is very different from where you people come from. I come from a place where a private school and a government school have two different systems, where a poor woman's child cannot apply for the same job as a rich man's child. Secondly, I come from a place where if you want to start up a business, like you're saying, you either have to be connected to a first family in a way. You can either be a friend of the first son, you can either be a sister or a brother to the first son. You will find out that all companies in my country are owned only by one family, and that's the first family. So until your people really tackle this issue of leaders that don't want to leave the power, and until the Western world stop rubbing shoulders with these dictators, then we will have a transformed Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Promise, thank you for your very strong words. And Promise, my speech today was not about leadership, but if you go and search about me, the first organization that I created in Africa is called Leap Africa. It's 17 years old, and we actually have just started working in Uganda. And the whole premise of why I started Leap Africa in 2002 was because I wanted Africans to understand that they could be leaders of today and tomorrow. The person you're referring to is not a leader, he's a ruler. There's a difference. And we have to realize that they're rulers and they're leaders. And we can be leaders. So what I do through LEAP and what LEAP does now, even in your country, is teach young Africans to lead. Everyone leaving here today, you have a role to play in changing that narrative. Change the narrative of what Africa is and what it should be and what it can be. Thank you.